In this section, we'll go over styling and using HTML attributes in JSX. HTML attributes in JSX are written as camel case. For example, in a button, you'd use camel case to make the HTML attribute of onClick to the JSX version of onC_click. The very widely used class attribute will actually be class name, and this is because JSX is all JavaScript and class is already a reserved keyword in JavaScript. To prevent any errors, you'll use class name, and the ID selector can be used the same way as you would in HTML. And the value of both class name and the ID attributes will be strings. There are some limitations, however. For example, you can't use CSS selectors such as :hover directly in the JSX. There is an easy workaround to this. Let's finish the button in our app class to test the :hover selector. We can create a separate app.css file in the same directory. In the app.css file, write button :hover and then the color of yellow. And then import the CSS file like so. We can save our file and go back to the dev server to see if it's working correctly. And yes, it is. So this is basically the first pattern to add styling to JSX. It's to simply have a separate CSS file for each component and then not do any styling directly in the JSX. This is probably the easiest and most effective pattern. This is one I both use and recommend. Another pattern to add styling to JSX is to create a const variable and declare all the styling in a JavaScript format. Let's go back to our app and see this. Let's now create an empty div inside our render method. Let's also create a const called styles and set it to an empty JavaScript object. In our JavaScript object, we can declare our styles. The key will be the CSS property and the value will be the CSS value. So let's create 3 CSS properties. Let's set border, text align, and box shadow. Notice that CSS properties that are separated by dash will also be camel case. Also notice that CSS values are strings, and each property is separated by a comma and not a semicolon, such as in CSS. Because remember, this is all just JavaScript. After setting up our styles variable, we can pass them into our div with the following syntax. Style equals curly brackets styles. Let's save our file and to see if it works. And yes, it is working. There's also another pattern you might see that's similar to this, where all the styles are kept in a separate file. Let's go back to our editor and create a file called styles.js. Let's cut and paste our const styles variable to this file. Back in our app.js file, let's import this variable with the import star as styles from ./styles. As styles is user defined and we could have called styles anything. Also pass in styles.styles to the div. Remember, the first styles is referring to the user defined property in the import statement, and the second styles is referring to the single variable in the styles.css file. If we save our files, we see that it is working. In larger apps, you do something like this. You'd have a variable called, for example, box styles and maybe another variable called button styles. Then instead of having to rewrite the style code in each component, you would just have one variable that holds the styles for all the buttons called button styles. And then you would just import that one variable and use it in the JSX instead of having to declare the styles in every component. And this is it. These are the 3 most common patterns you'll see for styling JSX. To reiterate, I recommend having a separate CSS file for each component. This is both the easiest and most effective method of styling JSX.